A single piece of parchment, sealed with wax, traveling 1,500 miles across mountains and deserts. Inside, words written by the most powerful man in the Western world. Words he believed would save lives. Words that instead signed the death warrants of 16,000 innocent people. The year is 324 AD. The Roman Emperor Constantine has just done the impossible. He ended 3 centuries of Christian persecution in his empire. Churches are being rebuilt. Believers are coming out of hiding. It is a miracle. So naturally, flushed with divine victory, Constantine decides to share his good fortune with the world. He writes a letter to his rival, the king of Persia, asking him to show mercy to Christians living under Persian rule. A simple request for religious tolerance from one ruler to another, or so it seems. Except that letter would become the single most catastrophic piece of diplomatic correspondence in ancient history. Within 15 years of its delivery, the Christian population of Persia would be drowning in their own blood. Bishops would be forced to watch hundreds of their priests beheaded before their own execution. Entire communities would be wiped from existence. Bodies would be left to rot in the streets as a warning to those who dared to resist. And the killing would not stop for 40 years. Yet, the most disturbing part of this story is that the man who wrote that letter never intended any of it. Constantine genuinely believed he was helping. He thought his words would protect Christians, not condemn them. He had no idea that the very act which saved his people would become the pretext for one of history's bloodiest religious persecutions. This is the story of the Great Slaughter of Persia, a nightmare triggered by Christian charity, and a vivid demonstration of how good intentions, political paranoia, and the weaponization of faith can combine to create mass destruction. To understand how Constantine's miracle became Persia's nightmare, we must first go back to Rome. For 3 centuries, being a Christian in the Roman Empire meant living on borrowed time, waiting for the knock on the door that could come at any moment. The Romans didn't just dislike Christians, they despised them. Christians refused to worship Roman gods or acknowledge the emperor's divinity, a refusal that was treated not as religious preference, but as treason. Rome blamed every disaster on Christian impiety and created horrifying propaganda to justify persecution. Christians were accused of cannibalism for participating in communion, incest for referring to each other as brother and sister, and atheism for rejecting traditional gods. The persecution was sadistically creative. Under Nero in 64 AD, Christians were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others were covered in pitch and set on fire as human torches for Nero's private garden parties. They burned alive, screaming, while Roman nobility sipped wine and watched. But even this horror paled in comparison to the events of 303 AD, when Emperor Diocletian launched the Great Persecution. Coordinated, calculated, and industrial in scope, the persecution destroyed churches, burned scriptures, and stripped Christians of legal protections. Bishops were roasted alive on metal grids, had their skin flayed, or were placed in iron chairs heated until flesh fused with the metal. One account describes 40 martyrs forced to stand naked on a frozen pond in the dead of winter, with a warm bathhouse nearby as bait to renounce their faith. 39 froze to death, while one soldier, moved by courage, stripped himself and claimed the deserter's place, declaring himself a Christian. For 8 years, the killing continued. By 311 AD, it seemed as though darkness would never end. Then everything changed. Enter Constantine. In 306 AD, he was just another ambitious general, but to become sole emperor, he had to defeat Maxentius, who controlled Rome with a larger, better-equipped army. By all military logic, he should have lost. Then came the vision. According to historian Eusebius, the afternoon before the battle at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine looked up and saw something impossible, a cross of brilliant light over the sun, with Greek words inscribed, "In this sign conquer." His entire army witnessed it. That night, Christ appeared in his dream, commanding him to paint the Chi symbol on his soldiers' shields. Constantine obeyed, ordering pagan soldiers to fight under a Christian symbol based on a vision. The battle was a massacre, but not of Constantine's forces. When Maxentius tried to retreat, his pontoon bridge collapsed, and thousands drowned, including Maxentius himself, sinking beneath the Tiber in full armor. Constantine rode into Rome as master of the Western Empire, and gave all credit to the Christian God. In 313 AD, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting Christians freedom of worship, the right to build churches openly, own property, and reclaim confiscated assets. After 3 centuries of fear, Christians celebrated openly, and Constantine became more than an emperor. He was seen as God's chosen instrument. Yet, it was this triumph, this moment of divine vindication, that inadvertently sowed the seeds of terror in Persia. The letter he sent, intended as an olive branch, was read by the Persian king as interference, a challenge to authority, and a reason to eliminate perceived threats. What was meant to protect became a pretext for slaughter. The story of Constantine's letter reminds us that even the noblest intentions can have catastrophic consequences when power, politics, and paranoia collide. Their nightmare had begun. Constantine started building massive churches, granted bishops legal authority, and exempted clergy from taxes. To Christians in Rome, he was nothing short of a saint, a savior after centuries of persecution. But miracles don't happen in a vacuum. About 1,500 miles east sat another empire, Rome's greatest rival for centuries, Persia. An empire with its own state religion and its own reasons to fear a Christian Rome. Within Persia lived thousands of Christians, and they were about to pay the price for Constantine's miracle. The Sasanian Empire of Persia was everything Rome was not. Where Rome was a multicultural patchwork, Persia was ancient, unified, and built on Zoroastrianism, the world's first monotheistic religion. Zoroastrianism framed the universe as a battleground between Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Ungra Mainyu, the spirit of darkness. Fire was sacred, representing divine purity, and at the heart of Persian power stood the Magi, the Zoroastrian priesthood, who were not just religious figures but kingmakers, advisors, and administrators. To them, Zoroastrianism was the very essence of Persian identity. So when Christianity began spreading into Persia via merchants and missionaries, the Magi perceived it as an existential threat, especially because these Christians had connections to believers in enemy Rome. On the Persian throne sat Shapur II, crowned while his mother was pregnant after his father's death, destined to reign for 70 years. Brilliant, ruthless, obsessed with Persian glory, Shapur understood that war with Rome was inevitable. Suddenly, Rome had a Christian emperor openly favoring Christianity, building churches, and granting Christians power. From Shapur's perspective, this was dangerous. Persia's Christians might feel greater loyalty to Rome than to their own king. The Magi whispered constantly in Shapur's ear that Christians were a fifth column, Roman sympathizers embedded in Persian society, refusing fire rituals, letting sacred fires die, contaminated by Western influence. For 30 years, Shapur tolerated them. They were not numerous enough to warrant attention. Then, around 324 AD, a letter arrived from Constantine. Having just defeated his last rival, he now ruled the entire Roman Empire. He sought to extend friendship to Shapur and drafted a carefully worded diplomatic note. Constantine announced his Christian faith, boasted that his God had granted him victory, and then mentioned that some of Persia's fairest provinces were home to many Christians. He wrote that this delighted him and urged Shapur to cherish and protect them. Constantine thought he was being generous and diplomatic, but through Persian eyes, his letter read as a provocation. The Roman emperor, Persia's greatest enemy, had just boasted about his Christian god's military victories, pointed out Christians living in Persian territory, and asked Shapur to protect them. Constantine was not merely offering advice. He was claiming Persian Christians as his own people and implying that Shapur had a duty to protect them, not as Persian subjects, but as fellow Christians. In the brutal calculus of ancient geopolitics, where every word was scrutinized for hidden power plays, Constantine's letter was catastrophic. It confirmed every fear the Magi had whispered, painting a target on every Christian in Persia. He had tried to save them, but instead had signed their death warrants. For 15 years, nothing happened. The letter sat like an unexploded bomb while Shapur faced wars on the eastern frontier and political intrigue at court. Then, in 337 AD, Constantine died. His sons divided the empire, unity fractured, and the Roman-Persian border heated up. War loomed. The Magi seized the opportunity. Persecution began with taxation. In 340 AD, Shapur imposed a crippling double tax on Christians, explicitly to fund war against Rome. He ordered Bishop Sherman Bar Sabi, head of the Persian Church, to collect this impossible levy from his impoverished flock, a cruel loyalty test. Fund the war against fellow Christians or prove treason. Sherman refused. Shapur's response was swift and merciless. He arrested Sherman, charging him with treason, claiming, "Sherman wants to make his disciples rebel against my kingdom and become servants of Caesar, their fellow believer." Constantine's 15-year-old letter had detonated. Shapur was now openly connecting Persian Christians to Rome, framing them as a fifth column. Sherman was brought before the king personally, and Shapur offered him a way out: abandon Christianity, worship the sun, and live in honor and wealth. The elderly bishop refused. What followed is recorded in the Syriac Acts of the Martyrs. Shapur ordered a special refinement before Shimon's execution. 100 of his priests were brought forth. One by one, in full view of Sherman, they were beheaded. Imagine the terror, the horror, the helplessness of witnessing this slaughter of your own clergy, your spiritual family, in front of you. It was a deliberate display of power, an act meant to crush any remaining loyalty to Rome and destroy the Christian community's moral backbone. For the Christians of Persia, Constantine's letter, intended as a bridge of goodwill, had become an instrument of their annihilation, a stark reminder of how intentions alone cannot prevent the machinery of politics and paranoia from descending into calculated bloodshed. The domino effect of this letter would cascade across decades, as the Magi leveraged the perceived threat of Roman loyalty to justify years of executions, confiscations, and forced conversions. Every Christian family in Persia became a target, every priest a potential martyr, every community at the mercy of rulers who saw faith as both a challenge to authority and a weapon of control. Constantine had thought he was extending mercy. He had, in the end, unleashed terror. Knowing your decision led to this moment, knowing you could stop it by renouncing your faith, Sherman did not break. He watched all 100 executions, blessing each man as he was led to the block, fully aware that his own death would follow. On Good Friday, 341 AD, the day Christians commemorate Christ's crucifixion, Sherman was executed as well. The symbolism was deliberate, but his death was only the beginning. What followed became known as the Great Slaughter, a 40-year campaign of systematic, state-sponsored persecution carried out with bureaucratic efficiency. The Magi compiled meticulous lists of Christians, governors received precise orders, and military units enforced compliance. The pattern was methodical. Target clergy first, bishops, priests, deacons, because severing the leadership would destabilize the community. Those who refused conversion were executed in cruel and terrifying ways. Crucifixion, stoning, impalement, or brutal torture such as being tied between bent trees and torn apart, having red-hot metal applied to flesh, and nails driven under fingernails. Ordinary believers followed. Entire communities faced a stark choice: convert or die. Many chose death. Chronicles describe dozens executed together, singing hymns as they perished, while the Magi reserved particular fury for converts from Zoroastrianism to Christianity. Apostasy was an automatic death sentence. There was no trial, no mercy, and the punishments were deliberately designed to terrorize, leaving bodies unburied as warnings. The persecution waxed and waned over decades, intensifying during wartime when Christians were considered potential fifth-column threats. Conservative estimates place the death toll at 16,000, though some records claim tens or even hundreds of thousands. Many victims were never recorded. Entire communities vanished. By the 380s, when the persecution subsided, the Church of the East was shattered. Bishops fled, churches lay in ruins, and survivors went underground, knowing discovery meant death. The irony is stark. Constantine's letter, meant to protect Christians in Persia, became the perfect justification for their destruction. Survivors learned painful lessons about visibility, loyalty, and survival. When persecution eased, the Persian Church carefully rebuilt, emphasizing local identity and cultivating theological traditions distinct from Rome to avoid the appearance of allegiance to a foreign power. The Church of the East eventually spread across Asia, reaching China by the 7th century, but always carried the scars of the Great Slaughter and the memory of what happens when religious identity intersects with politics. Constantine never learned the consequences of his letter. He died in 337 AD, unaware that his act of interfaith diplomacy had backfired catastrophically, killing thousands instead of protecting them. This is the most disturbing part. His intentions were genuinely good. He was not seeking anyone's death, but acted from faith, compassion, and solidarity, believing his words could extend protection to Christians under hostile rulers. Yet his fatal miscalculation, assuming that because Christianity saved Rome, his message would be received as benevolent by a paranoid Persian king, cost countless lives. Shapur was not a mindless tyrant. He faced real strategic dilemmas. Rome had fought Persia for centuries, and now a Christian emperor claimed interest in Persian Christians. From Shapur's perspective, ignoring this could invite rebellion or espionage. He acted to secure his realm. Tragically, his perception was based on Constantine's letter, not actual conspiracy. Most Persian Christians were loyal subjects, simply trying to survive. The letter had created the pretext for violence where none existed. The lesson resonates across centuries. Good intentions alone are not enough. Without understanding context, without considering how actions will be interpreted by others, even acts of compassion can produce catastrophic results. Constantine's letter is a 1,700-year-old warning. Identity can be politicized, loyalty questioned, and faith weaponized when it crosses borders. Persian Christians suffered not for their actions, but for how others imagine their potential allegiances, proving that even virtuous acts can have devastating consequences when misread. It meant Persian subjects potentially felt more loyalty to a foreign emperor than to their own king. We see this pattern today with religious, ideological, and ethnic identities that create solidarity but also generate suspicion from the state. Persecution is rarely about theology alone. The Great Slaughter happened because religion became entangled with politics, power, and war. Shapur did not persecute Christians over doctrine. He acted because Constantine's letter transformed Christianity into a perceived security threat. Religious persecution spikes during political crises. When states feel endangered, religious minorities with transnational connections become convenient targets. The powerful rarely witness the consequences. Constantine died comfortably, never seeing the corpses piled in Persian streets, never meeting the refugees fleeing persecution. His letter sparked catastrophe, illustrating the privilege of power, making decisions for distant people without ever facing the outcomes. History's tragedies often made perfect sense to those involved. Shapur was not insane. Constantine was not evil. The Magi were not sadists by personal preference. Each acted according to the logic of their times, making rational decisions based on the information they had. Yet, 16,000 people died anyway. The horror lies not in senselessness, but in the fact that the massacre made perfect sense given the empires, religions, and leaders involved. 17 centuries later, we are still reading a letter that directly caused mass death. Constantine's miracle in the West became a massacre in the East. His triumph became their tragedy. His good intentions paved a literal road to hell, and we are still walking on its bones. The Great Slaughter stands as one of history's most devastating examples of how faith, politics, and power, when intertwined, can create catastrophe. It reminds us that religious freedom is fragile, that good intentions require strategic wisdom, and that leaders must consider consequences when wielding power, especially in efforts to help. Persian Christians endured 40 years of systematic persecution because two emperors failed to see past their own perspectives. Constantine saw himself as Christianity's protector and could not fathom endangering believers elsewhere. Shapur saw threats everywhere and could not distinguish imagined conspiracies from innocent faith. The people trapped in the middle paid the ultimate price. If this story disturbed you, challenged you, or made you reconsider historical narratives, that is exactly why we do what we do. Subscribe to Crimson Historians and hit the notification bell because we are committed to uncovering truths mainstream education often obscures. These are stories too dark, too complex, and too uncomfortable to fit sanitized history books. We give voice to silenced victims, expose brutal ironies that shaped civilizations, and connect the dots between ancient atrocities and modern patterns that many overlook. Every video is meticulously researched from primary sources, academic scholarship, and historical accounts rarely seen by the public. We do not sensationalize, we illuminate. We do not exploit tragedy. We honor it by ensuring these stories are never forgotten. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us which historical ironies you believe deserve more attention. Which unintended consequences changed civilizations? Which forgotten massacres need to be remembered? Your suggestions drive our content, and some of the most powerful stories we have covered emerged directly from this community. If you found value in this video, if it made you reconsider what you knew, share it. Post it to someone who loves history, circulate it in your communities, because these stories must be seen. The algorithm will not always prioritize truth. We rely on you to amplify it. Remember this, the past is not dead. It is not even past. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes with terrifying consistency. Patterns like good intentions weaponized, transnational identities turned into death sentences, and power exercised without accountability are not just historical. They continue today. The Great Slaughter illustrates what happens when people fail to see beyond assumptions, fail to consider unintended consequences, and fail to recognize that their truth is not universal. Do not make the same mistake. Do not allow good intentions to blind you to the harm they can cause. Do not assume that power, even when wielded with pure motives, is cost-free. Study history not to feel superior to the past, but to recognize yourself in it. Ordinary, rational, well-intentioned people can participate in or enable atrocities simply by neglecting to consider the consequences of their actions. That is the lesson. That is why we do this. That is why these stories matter. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning the narratives you are fed. This is Crimson Historians, where we dig up the truths history tried to bury.